for Jewish life,
Solnida.
Holocaust psychotherapy, and critical approaches to
Aisha.
trauma narratives. He has also published many
உன்னை நான்
articles
அட்மிட் கொடுத்துட்டேனே.
based on Holocaust studies, which are highly appreciated by many societies across the world. Adding a feather to his cap, Dr. Immanuel has also compiled and edited books such as The Quest, A Guide to Better English, and Expressions for Daily Life. I'm sure this seminar will be meaningful, thought provoking, and will have a tremendous positive impact on all the participants today. Thank you all. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Christy. Once again, I welcome one and all for the webinar on a brief introduction to Holocaust study by Dr. V. Immanuel. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. Am I audible? It's clear. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. And also, I request all other participants to mute and to listen and enjoy the session. Please.
Thank you. I hope I'm audible and clear to all. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, all. The lecture is titled A Brief Introduction to Holocaust Studies. I'll inform a bit about Holocaust and studies that center around Holocaust. I would want you to listen carefully, else you will miss the logical order. I've categorized my lecture into 4 simple parts: the brief history, a brief introduction to the world, an introduction to Jews, an introduction to Holocaust, an introduction to Holocaust studies, and a few words of conclusion. I also seek the favor of God for a comprehensive and a just outlook to the topic. Now, anything that I tell you is just a drop in an ocean, and the rest is for you to explore. I would better start with a history of the world, because the history of the world and the history of the Jews are the same. Middle East was chosen to write the history of the world. And this is how I will introduce the world history to you. There is a world, there are worlds, and there are other worlds. When I say other worlds, I refer to spaces in the universe that man does not operate from. It is not for the utility of man. But going with the first category, the world, it's a confined geographic space. And there are a number of countries that share this space. Now, history says that few countries in the world govern larger part of the globe from time to time. Can you imagine that Alexander the Great he conquered some 3/4 of the world. Today, if you think of Athens or Greece, they are not remembered other for the sporting activities. But it is good for you all to first know the historical timeline of kingdoms. And this is how I'm giving you. And when I say kingdom or an empire, I'm only referring to a country which acts as the financial and military capital of the world, starting with the Egyptian Empire in 1200 BC. And then the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. And Christ actually came during the Roman Empire. Friends, I'm not trying to give you some irrelevant things. I gave you these details of the empires that existed in the world before the coming of Christ to tell you that in all the 6 empires, the Jewish people played a significant role. Not some general authority. They were into the royal bloodline. They were into the kingdom. They dictated terms in the GDP of the country. Now, after Christ, there were several empires that reigned the world from time to time. For instance, the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the German Empire, and all of us are aware of the British Empire, which started in 1607. You see, friends, 54 countries are now called as Commonwealth countries under this one a tiny country. In fact, the English journalist, the most popular English journalist, Malcolm Margaret, said, this country which ruled a greater part of the world is now being threatened of dismemberment. Currently, the world is governed by the US Empire. And I wish the Chinese people don't listen to this lecture because they are not willing to accept the fact that the US Empire is ruling the world. But don't underestimate Jewish dispersion. The Jews were into all these empires, and Jewish dispersion was vital for the constitution of the world empires. Now you will get a little clue why the world has been anti-Semitic. The social history of the world has been anti-Semitic in nature. Even today, the situation is the same. Most of us who were born after the Second World War, we have no understanding of what anti-Semitism is all about. Those who do not know what anti-Semitism is all about, just wait for 10 years, you have another world war, the Third World War, and you will know what anti-Semitism is all about. And you will be helplessly an anti-Semite. One of the intellectual challenges in academia is to document history. And one of the challenges in documenting history is to comply with the truth factor. Systematic tarnishing of Jewish image was guaranteed. Talking about Israel, Israel originally existed as a theocratic state, but the present system of government is based on parliamentary democracy as that of India. I've always wondered how the Jewish people who strictly follow Torah and Talmud accept parliamentary democracy. There are several such contradictions that exist in the Jewish space. But national and global administration was originally intended for a king. People love democracy, but originally people were designed for a kingdom. Democratic state, a democratic state is the most unruly state. Since people love to be unruly, or I should rather put it as people love to be independent, they love democracy. Now, getting into a very brief introduction to the Jewish people. The Jews have a history of nearly 6,000 years, and they have a monotheistic religion. Their God is by name Yahweh. Today, you cannot find one Jew in the world who would use the name of their God, because they do not use the name of their God in vain. Therefore, since their religion is a monotheistic religion, they do not accept Christianity, because Christianity has a Trinitarian doctrine. They cannot accept that three persons can be called as one God. Islam also has the same problem with Christianity, because Islam cannot accept the fact that God has a son. We are discussing an Asian country which has been deciding the history of the whole world for thousands of years. And the origin of the Jewish people goes back to ancient Persia, because the Jewish patriarchs were from Persia, which is called the modern Iran. They are very resilient in nature, and they are called the indestructible tribe in the world. So much so that after 1,900 years of being homeless, they can speak Hebrew with proper Hebrew grammar. Some years ago, a Red Indian language died because there was only one person who was using the language, and when he died, the language also died. But that was not the case with the Hebrew people and the Hebrew language. Friends, the major religions in the world evolved as a mere movement, and then they evolved into a religion. And on the heels of a particular religion came other religion. Therefore, the major religions in the world are offshoots of some other religion. I'm confused how a new system can be framed by an old system. See, people were displeased with a particular school of thought or a particular religion for many years, and therefore they went off and formed a new religion, but they take some 10 points from some other religion and fix it here and compromise. But the uniqueness of the Jewish people, of Judaism, is that the religious identity, the national identity, and the racial identity are the same, which you don't find in any other country. Since we are dealing with the Jewish community, which has profound historical roots, I draw my source and sort of backed up by two famous historians, Flavius Josephus, a Jew who lived in the 1st century Anno Domini, 1st century AD, and Arnold Toynbee, a popular 18th century historian who said, the history of the Jews is the history of the world. The Jewish people had very special customs. They had social laws. They have the Torah and the Talmud to guide them. They know that in Israel today, unless the rabbis say, even the new prime minister cannot be announced. And they don't encourage the interreligious marriage system. The Jewish people have special dietary laws, and observance of Shabbat, Sabbath as we say, is practiced even today. Even in the scattered places in the world, they had their synagogues. See, when the Jewish people scattered to different parts of the world, they even came to India. They got settled down in Cochin, Mumbai, and in some of the northeastern parts of the country. But if you go to Cochin today, there is a Jewish synagogue where people gather and worship their God. Their community is a very strange community with very strange laws. Some 600 plus laws are in existence even today. But we have to know that it's a religious system. Once I found an elevator in a hotel in Israel, and the elevator was titled Shabbat Lift. So I asked the person, well, how does this lift make a difference between the other lifts? And the person said, you don't have to press a button on the day of Sabbath. This difference exists, but you can climb 200 steps and reach your room in the 7th floor. That's accepted, but you can't press the button. The Jewish people, they have a history which is very authentic, and it's all recorded. There are no concoctions, whereas in many other countries, The epics decide the history. History is understood through their epic writing. Epic only creates war between neighbors. But with the Jewish people, every minute detail, their invasions are all verified and written. Their history was actually written by the natives from different periods of time. See, every country, it claims historical significance. Every country in the world wants to be identified with the history of the world. But who writes it and when was it written? That is worth noting. Take, for instance, who wrote the history of India? Who is this person, William Dalrymple? Okay, the most popular book on Indian freedom struggle, Freedom at Midnight, which every history student or every Indian reads, was written by Collins and Lapierre. India, a History, was written by John Key, except for the book, The Discovery of India, which was written by the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru. Of course, it's a beautiful writing. Most history of India was written by people who were not Indians. This is just for an example. But the Jewish people had fine cultural life. They had a good cultural balance. Lots of feasts and celebrations were happening all through the year. The Jewish folk songs are always welcome. They are very popular. Even their enemies love to listen to the soul-warming Jewish folk songs. You can even trace some of the folk songs to the Indian movies and Indian songs which are now available. Israel today is more like Europe. The streets are filled with music. It's all vibrant. The community is a vibrant community. I would recommend you to once listen to the Israeli national anthem. It fills your heart. I understand that some of you are telling me that I'm pacing up. I need to go a bit slow. Fine. Thank you. There are a few types of Jews who are commonly known. The conservative Jews, they are the traditional Jews. Then you have the Orthodox Jews. They are the faithful followers of Judaism. They have the Halakha, the Jewish law. Then you have the Reform Jews, who are also known as the liberal or progressive Jews. They believe in the evolving nature of religion. They believe that from time to time, religion can keep evolving. Earlier, I thought it's a very funny idea. But when I see the transformation that is coming up in Saudi Arabia, I thought that the religion can actually go to the next levels. It can go to the next phases. Then you have the Messianic Jews, Jews who do not believe in Christ as their Messiah. Do you know that Jews are still waiting for their Messiah? Therefore, Christians are a minority or a real minority in Israel because they consider Christ as a rebel. Then you have the Hasidic Jews and many others. Sadly, Jewish diaspora started early in the first millennium. Then you have to know about the accommodation of the Jewish people in the Middle Ages, which is very interesting, and their remarkable prosperity during the Ottoman period. But the genocide happened only day before yesterday in the 20th century. Jewish history is a largely stigmatized history. It is deconstructed and it is dubiously construed. Friends, we have to know that this is a stigmatized world. Basic human tendency is to create identities on people that are not real. I have always wondered why the world has been anti-Semitic. Martin Luther, a Catholic rebel, did more damage to the Jewish people than anyone else, and without any valid reason. The Crusaders, who call themselves Christians, spoiled their reputation, and that's why Christianity doesn't flourish in Israel today. I asked a passerby in Jerusalem once, "Where is Gethsemane?" He asked me, "What is Gethsemane?" I said, "That's a place where Jesus was buried." He just looked at me and said, "I don't know." So that was pretty surprising. Now, I'm just getting into an introduction to Holocaust in general. Hope you're with me, hope you're following me. Now, this is an important area. The 20th century is the most bloodiest century in history. More blood was shed in this century than the rest of the centuries put together. Now, we are in the 21st century, and only 20 years have gone by, and still we have started to feel the pain of it. We do not know what the future holds for us. But the 20th century was guided by a term called survival. It was no more living. The term survival started even 100 years ago. But this is a post-industrial age, or it can be called the post-truth age. Early 20th century found several evils orchestrated by prominent countries. That's what I meant when I started saying certain empires, certain countries were ruling the world. The world was ruled by one or two countries from time to time. The African slave trade, oppression in the Commonwealth countries, Holocaust, two terrible world wars, horrors of infamous communist regime in China or some of them. Friends, never undermine the brutal efficiency of China. I'll come to it later. But the most notorious of them all, the horrific event, is the Jewish genocide by the Nazis, which brought Shoah, calamity, into the Jewish lives. Now, I would define in general what Holocaust is. Holocaust can be defined as a mass murder. It could be simply defined as a mass murder of the Jewish race by the Nazi Germany. They annihilated 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children. Today, if you go to Germany, you cannot use the word Holocaust in general commonly to anyone. You'll be put behind bars. Imagine that the horror that runs in the mind of the perpetrator of the crime, that if you use the word Holocaust today, it is not welcomed. What is the basic reason? It's anti-Semitism. And how do you define anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is prejudice, hatred, discrimination against the Jews. They were represented in poor light. William Shakespeare wrote a play, The Merchant of Venice, in which he created a character, a Jew by name Shylock. Christopher Marlowe wrote a play, The Jew of Malta, in which he created a character, Barabbas. The Jews were misrepresented. They were called the moneylenders. Friends, you and I today have taken loans with banks to build our houses, and we are giving back a huge fortune to the bank. Would you not be careful to collect a penny that drops from your pocket? But when a Jew does that, who will not be careful about that? But when a Jew does that, rows are raised. Please read the Nuremberg laws, which will introduce you to the annihilation of the Jewish people. They are terrible racist laws which Nazi Germany created. I call them pure lawless. They are not laws, they are lawlessness. Of course, lawlessness has different meanings, but they are not laws. And Nazi Germany also violated international law. If Israel says today that it cannot be governed by international law, nobody accepts that. By the way, not all international laws are acceptable laws. You have to know, within the same country, there are some laws which cannot be applied to a particular people or a particular place. All marriages between Jews and Germans became invalid. They were stripped of their possessions, and all Jews were asked to wear a yellow badge to be discriminated. And they were stripped of their social rights and political rights. And the Germans wanted to preserve their bloodline, and I would say the Aryan supremacy began here. What began as a minor political change soon became a storm which the Jewish people could not handle. What could be the reasons for Holocaust? Friends, in 1920, Germany's greatest fear was that it had to go to Jews for almost everything practically. Jews had medicine even for syphilis that was discovered by a Jew. They had medicines for heart disease, insulin for diabetes, and all chemical combinations for trauma care the Jewish people had. In the year 1931, in Berlin, 42% of doctors were Jews. 48% of lawyers were Jews. Of the 144 film scripts they had, 122 were with the Jewish people. The Chamber of Commerce in Germany had 83% Jewish people. Social Democrats were of 25%. And the Jewish people held a share of 57% of metal trade. 22% of grain was in their hands. And the textile industry close to 40%. Therefore, Hitler felt that he had to respond to the situation. He began to call them inferior. It is interesting to see how excelling people can be called inferior. It was the elimination of those he judged as inferior. There was a popular phrase existing those days, which was called the final solution. The final solution to the Jewish question is the decimation of the Jewish people. Now, there are other things that you have to definitely understand. In the concentration camps, people really worked to death. Life expectancy in Auschwitz was only for a few months. Hunger, thirst, cold, heavy labor, disease, and torture were a part of those camps. Even today, there are a few popular photographs that are available. You can check it. The Holocaust museums are preserving those photos, which depict the lives of the Jewish people those days. Origin, class, and family status were significant, but only for a period of time. Among the Jewish people, there were a few disadvantaged groups also, but the categorization did not last long. Sickness in the camp never meant for recovery. They were asked to remain in the infirmary only up to 6 days, and anyone who did not recover within that period of time was sent to the gas chambers. There are testimonies that describe how women used to pinch their cheeks to give them more color that they might be allowed to live. Hilberg, a popular historian, uses statistics from the Jewish ghettos in Poland that the death rate in men was 3.5 times than that of the women. Friends, I want to tell you that there are some quintessential feminine qualities that facilitate survival. There are certain quintessential feminine qualities that facilitate survival. I'm not trying to essentialize women. I'm not trying to valorize, patronize them. After a long time, I realized that some of the most traditional and cultural opinion on women are not right. Cultures of the world systematically stripped women of strength. There were even some Greek philosophers who said that women are subhuman. They were not willing to accept the fact that women are also human beings. They said the men were human beings, man was human, and the woman, they could not include them under the animal category, and they said the women are subhuman people. In fact, D.H. Lawrence said that women have less number of teeth than men, but he had 3 wives. Okay. The Nazi agenda in the concentration camps was to destroy their core personalities. This is one of the deadliest damages that was inflicted on the Jewish people. The ghettos, or the walled-off community, they were confined, and it was constantly patrolled by the so-called SS men. From there, they were taken to spots for forced labor. I would recommend you all to once view the popular film Schindler's List, to know what forced labor is all about. There were severe legislative reforms, intense reforms in Germany. I'm surprised how Hitler enjoyed absolute powers. His cabinet approved that. Political parties, professional organizations, cultural groups, government agencies, the law, he used every available means to destroy the Jewish people. From 1933 to 1945, 2,000 racist laws were introduced in Germany. He was the worst racist in the world. There was verbal attack and written attack, boycott of Jewish stores, property confiscated, and they were asked to emigrate Germany. Every Jew lost his job. All benefits were made invalid. They were denied entry into hotels, theaters, resorts, schools, and their properties were taken from them. There were many camps during those days, and some of their camps are labor camps, concentration camps, extermination camps, death camps, etc. They instilled fear in the minds of the Jewish people. They were terribly insulted, whipped, denuded, their bodies were mutilated, and they were asked to carry dead bodies. Manual labor was very tough for many hours. They were hungry, they were thirsty, they were beaten for no reason at all, and thousands were gassed, and many were publicly hanged. Jews were frozen to death. There used to be a roll call those days that early in the morning, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and people froze to death. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and a popular speaker and writer, he speaks of a bed which was only 6.5 into 2.5 feet, which is smaller than an average bed today. And he says, in that 6 to 9 men were made to sleep. 6 to 9 men in a place where only one person could sleep. They were caged into cells where on all 3 sides there were nails, and they were made to be lie down in that position for 18 hours. And if they sleep, it will peel off flesh and blood. Families were split, which is very similar to the African American literature. You will find it in the British colonies. You actually have to read the letters that family members wrote to one another. The letters that children wrote to their fathers, wives wrote to their husbands. Every line will choke you. Friends, sitting in the Holocaust lecture, you cannot complain of ant bite and pinching and scolding. You actually have to get tough. There were electrified fences in the camp, and people just committed suicide by throwing themselves. They were forced to immerse their hands into boiling water pots where their fingernail and skin just came off as gloves. The SS men used to prepare special steel boots which they used to stamp the Jewish people. They tied their hands at the back and hanged them, that when they did that, their shoulders were out of joint. Extracting teeth was the toughest thing, where it was administered without medicine to alleviate pain. They ran electric shock on children and inflicted peculiar pain. They were thrown from buildings, they were shot dead, and they were used for military training. Adolf Eichmann, one of the three generals of the German army, when he was captured, he was asked, "How can you play with your 8-year-old son when you killed millions of Jewish children?" He quietly responded, "For the very simple reason that my son is not Jewish." Friends, 2 lakh Jewish women underwent forced sterilization. Eva Galler, a Holocaust survivor, narrates her experience in a train where she was going with her 3 sisters and her father forced them all to jump off the train, and 2 of her sisters were shot dead, but she narrowly escaped. Pregnant women were gassed. Cold water was poured on them. And all of you will have a general question. What was the world doing when all this evil was happening? They did not have Facebook or the social media which covered things immediately and publicized to the whole world. But there were countries that were still watching that. Friends, it did not happen in a Bronze Age, it happened in 20th century. When Mahatma Gandhi was preaching untouchability in India, Hitler was killing millions. And Mr. Gandhi wrote a letter to Hitler to stop the carnage, but nothing would stop him. And there were a number of other ways by which he used to kill the Jews, but you wouldn't be happy to listen to all of them. What I've told you are just the modest ones. The concentration camps were many. They were in Austria, Belarus, Belgium, Czech, France, Germany, Latvia, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Ukraine, and many more places. The most notorious extermination camps were in Auschwitz, Treblinka, Warsaw, Poland, and Dachau. The Jewish ghettos were placed in Hungary, Lithuania, and Poland, and in other places. Places like Serbia acted as labor camps. Places like France and Netherlands, they had internment camps or the transit camps. When you look at all these things, understand it's an orchestrated evil. We have to understand what human mind is all about, because human mind was employed to hurt others. I used to think if only all that energy could be used positively, how humanity could be a better place today. Hitler loved anything that was militaristic. Please read Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian exile who is now in the United States, his Harvard address, where he says that diplomacy and military will not help the world to solve problems. Even Gadamer's philosophy says the same. He says of 12 great problems in the world, and he says the military way of solving problems is a problem. Friends, two things put me in awe after the Holocaust. Comrade Adenauer, the first Chancellor of Germany, was a Christian. And there are many Christians in Germany today. I would also want you to read Richard Dawkins, a popular scientist, an atheistic scientist from the US, his book, The God Delusion, where he feels that he speaks about Adolf Hitler. And Hitler says that he was mysteriously commissioned by God to kill the Jewish people because they killed Jesus. Hitler is found there saying, "The Lord asked me to take revenge on the Jewish people for killing the Son of God." Very interesting news. There are a number of reasons why Hitler did it. I believe he did it out of fear. Hitler was a young boy in a school, and his school teacher asked him, "What do you want to become in the future?" And he said, "I want to become a painter." In fact, he painted the world red. When I say these details, it is absolutely imperative to speak of China as well. Germany did it to a stranger, but read the history of the latter 20th century China, you will find China did it to its own people. For the Jewish people exhibited tremendous survival instinct. But among the Jews, among the Germans, there were some of them who actually helped the Jewish people. That has to be recognized, one like Schindler, Oskar Schindler. In 1993, Yad Vashem, the world's transnational Holocaust Study Center in Jerusalem, it awarded Oskar and Emily Schindler the title Righteous Among the Nations in recognition of their efforts to save Jews during the Holocaust at great personal risk. Personally, to me, it is greater than all the Nobel Prizes in the world. The postmodern definitions that we have in the world are atrociously foolish. Having listened to what Holocaust is all about, you have to understand that we have unreal definitions on success, on happiness, on love, on achievement. If tested once, it will come down like a pack of cards. The more I read Holocaust literature, my definitions got changed. Usually people say, I want somebody to be faithful to me, therefore I can love the person. I understood that love has nothing to do with faithfulness. I'm not belittling the efficacy of love, but it's basically a commitment that in those days they even loved a person who was unfaithful. Happiness, Viktor Frankl used to say, happiness should happen and success should happen, but we are trying to create it. I'm not giving you a general philosophy. I'm speaking the words of a Jewish Holocaust survivor. He said happiness should happen to a person. It cannot be created. And he said that love goes very far beyond the physical presence of the person. It is not even necessary. Now coming to an introduction to Holocaust studies, I would like to give a few references about the Middle Eastern literature in general. There are four prominent Middle Eastern literatures: the Arabian literature, the Persian literature, the Turkish literature, and the Yiddish literature in particular. Now, apart from this, there are several other types of literatures available from the Middle East. You have the Syrian literature, the Yemen literature, the Sudanese literature, Lebanese literature, and many more. Arabian literature has it, and you also should be knowing a very popular poet by name Omar Khayyam of the 11th century. He belongs to the 11th century Iran, a very influential intellectual figure. But his poems were actually translated by Edward Fitzgerald only in the 19th century. He was a giant of a man. Ferdowsi is perhaps Iran's most famous poet, credited for writing Shahnameh. All of you should be aware of a poet by name Rumi. He's not only a popular poet, but an influential poet worldwide. Friends, today, Iranian poetry is claiming new heights. Beautiful verses are coming from Iran today. Nida Khoury is the first Arab-Israeli poet, and she's also included in the curriculum. Elif Shafak, the most widely read woman in Turkey, her work has been translated in an unbelievably 30 languages. Another Palestinian-American author, translator and professor, Randa Jarrah, is widely known for articles on identity and belonging. Coming to Jewish literature, it is basically rabbinic in nature, didactic in nature. It's called rabbinic literature. Then you have the Kabbalistic literature, which is the mystical literature. You have the Hasidic literature, where you have the parables and stories. The Yiddish literature is a prominent one. To the Hebrew writing is a miracle. And you have enormous Hebrew literature as well. Coming to Jewish studies, when I wanted to launch my Jewish studies, I found there are at least three prominent kinds of Jewish writers today. You have the Jewish Canadian writers, Mordecai Rickler, Joseph Sherman, Stuart Ross. I'm just naming a few of them. And the second category, you have the Jewish English writers, people from Britain. Popular ones like Harold Pinter, Nizim Ezekiel, Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is my favorite writer. I sometimes felt that the accumulated wisdom of the human race was with this writer. Then you have those Jewish American writers like Saul Bellow, Norman Mailer, Elie Wiesel, Leslie Fielder, Philip Roth, Bernard Malamud, and many more. I'm just giving you a few names, which are the known names. There are plenty of insignificant yet powerful writers from all these areas. And when you just get into the critical world, you have to know that the critical world is governed by Jewish thinkers. Please find from the net the list of critical writers, Jewish critics. I'm just giving you a short list of literary critics: Lionel Trilling, Leslie Fielder, M.H. Abrams, Sigmund Freud, Stanley Fish, Theodore Adorno, beautiful literary critic, Jacques Derrida, Ellen Showalter, and many, many more people who defined Jewish thought in the critical world. I would also like to suggest a number of books to you which are fundamental to the knowledge of Holocaust. All of you can read the book The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. Martin Gilbert, any book of Martin Gilbert is worth reading. I found Martin Gilbert's book in India. I found it in other places, in different universities and libraries. The book, The Holocaust, is an excellent one. Con Sherbrooke is another beautiful writer. And I can mail you scores of beautiful writers who will launch you into Holocaust research and general Holocaust studies. But then there are some common people who introduce Holocaust to you through the popular material. Many of you would have read Anna Frank. Anna Frank was a teenage Jewish girl who kept writing a diary while her family was hiding from the Nazis during the World War II. Then you have some powerful films. Many of you would have watched the film The Schindler's List, The Pianist, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. I would want you to once view the film The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. Then there are scores of other films, novels, and plenty of literature. Those who are into the study of literature, I have to tell you that after the reign of the African American literature studies in the literary world, Jewish American studies gained significance. But people fail to notice the significance of that. Some of them picked it up. Night, the novel by Elie Wiesel, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anna Frank, If This Is a Man by Primo Levi. If This Is a Man is a memoir by Italian Jewish writer Primo Levi, published in the year 1947. It describes his arrest and resistance. But most people start with Primo Levi and Anna Frank. Holocaust studies have a global reach today through films, diaries, and memoir. Friends, most countries create history through literature. But you know how the Chinese people created their history in the latter part of the 20th century? It was only revealed through journalists. The same thing is happening in some countries today. Some of the key themes, literary theme into a narrative account or the story. You can even narrate music. Secondly, the challenge of dealing with myth. I once encountered a person in Israel. He asked me why I'm in Israel for. I said, I'm here for a Holocaust program. And he said, what is Holocaust? When did it happen? Why do you believe in all such theories? It's some conspiracy. It was Samuel Johnson who said, what cannot be cured must be endured. We have to endure such people. The Holocaust is basically a historical research. So when you learn Jewish history, you're actually learning the history of the world. Then you have the immigrant voices. See, this is one advantage with Jewish writing today, because the Jewish people were scattered into the whole world. And you get beautiful flavors in the literary world today. All of us are very proud, Indians are very proud of Nizim Ezekiel. We call him an Indian Jew. Obviously, when he writes a text, there is something Indian in it. How can we present Holocaust to students of literature? I would want you to first consider memory studies. Memory studies, I mean preservation of memory, transfer of memory, and presenting memory. Sometimes it's, I feel it's even beyond literature, it's beyond art. Just check the number of Holocaust study centers and museums that are existing in Europe and America. In fact, literature is a symbolic form of preserving memory. If you go to Yad Vashem today, there are many, many ways. They have schemed many ways of learning Holocaust through films, autobiographies, poetry, and architecture. Then there are plenty of theories that are available. I would just try to introduce this one theory, which is Viktor Frankl's local therapy. It's an existential psychotherapy that emphasizes the importance of meaning in life. Very simply, you can understand. It speaks about meaning in life. I would also want you to read his book, Man's Search for Meaning and Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, which is a sequel to the first one. Indian students, I understand, take special interest dealing with pain and suffering. That's a part of that's in our fabric. But understand, you cannot romanticize suffering. You cannot make it into an emotional one. Study of literature should not make a person emotional. I remember once I was teaching Sara Abu Bakr. Sara Abu Bakr is a writer from Karnataka. Her novel of The River. Suddenly I just could not contain myself. But I have to tell you that that should not happen. We cannot get emotional. As an Indian, I'll tell you some of my findings. I even wrote it in my thesis that necessary suffering results in the ennobling of the sensory of the soul and the control of the sensory apparatus. That's one of the things I mentioned. Tool of affliction as a propitiation for the deeds committed, and natural consequences directed by the ultimate reality to preserve order and justice. But what I have told complexities of justice, democracy, and human rights. Human rights is not what we talk about. We have a sophisticated perspective on human rights. There has to be a benchmark. For the Jewish people, they were denied of their right to live. Yet another potential area of study is the functioning of contemporary societies.
And the skilled labor. Look at a country like Japan. See, Japan is also an affluent society, but that affluent society was created by natives. See, Japan never encourages migrant workforce. They don't import migrant workforce. They themselves work hard, and they have built such a strong economy. One of the most powerful nations in the world. They belong to Group 7, and it's an affluent society. Now look at an affluent society like Dubai, which was built by migrants, and affluent society like Japan, which was built by natives. Now,
hello, Miss Ansi Johnson. Miss Ansi Johnson, please mute your mic. Miss Ansi Johnson, please mute your mic. We want to listen to the speaker. Please mute your mic.
Okay, thank you. I think I can continue now. So I was telling you of another potential area of study is the functioning of contemporary societies. It's a larger study, it's an interesting one. When terrible things were happening, the neighbors just shut the door, and all the countries of the world just closed their eyes to what was happening. Nationalism is another concept that is worth analyzing. It's not an ideal solution, it is just an ideal. Idealism can be very deadly because it has got a philosophical pre-commitment to it. How do we usually define nationalism? We say it's an ideology that promotes the welfare of a nation. But what if that ideology spoils the welfare of another nation? That's why nationalism cannot have a common and a constant definition. There should be a difference between the nationalism that each country has. There is a difference between German nationalism and Jewish nationalism and Indian nationalism. But I also have to tell you that today there is a kind of nationalism in some countries that kills its own people. I shall leave those countries unnamed. There are varieties of nationalism today. But the German nationalism is of a radical type. It's of an unacceptable type, like the Chinese nationalism. Hitler also sensed class struggle. Every age senses class struggle, and the response differs from country to country. And the kind of response that you give to a class struggle tells you of the cultural history of the country. You can understand by how class struggle was understood in India. I don't have to give you the names of the popular thinkers and speakers who dealt with class struggle in my state or in other places. Marx understood it in a different way. He just categorized people as haves and have-nots, but it is for your common understanding. Then there is the social side of Hitler. He had the Darwinist view of life where the strong should survive and the weak should perish. Now, Plato and Aristotle have also talked enough about it, but we have to understand that Germany and Hitler were actually influenced by Nietzsche's Superman. That's why Toynbee, 18th century historian Toynbee, said that religion has to come in the form of humanism and help mankind. He did not speak about a particular religion, but he said any religion in general has to come in the form of humanism and help mankind. Holocaust studies also help you in diplomacy studies. See, Middle East is the hotbed for world politics, and students of literature should consider ethnic studies and ethnic character. For instance, when you read American writer Bernard Malamud and his novel *The Fixer*, he speaks about the Tsarist Russia, where you get a historical picture. I would encourage you to read novels that have a historical base than some of the general stories which can just entertain you. Then you get to the philosophical side. You as an Indian have an advantage because we deal with both the Eastern and the Western philosophy. It really helps you to study suffering. The problem with the Eastern philosophy is that it cannot sell the philosophy to the Western world. See, you and I will accept it. How many in the world would accept karma? We have a philosophical pre-commitment and therefore we accept it. But the problem with the Western world is that it is too critical that the analysis itself becomes burdensome and confusing. I would also like to add one more point to it. What is the critical approach to Holocaust? Now, critical approach is necessary for any research. You cannot discount it, you cannot discredit it. It is required, otherwise your research becomes a mere assignment, a bigger assignment, which a PG student does or a school student does. I referred the philosopher Adorno. He says it is barbaric to write a poem on Holocaust. He said, it means to squeeze aesthetic pleasure out of artistic representation of the naked bodily pain of those who have been knocked down by rifle butts through aesthetic principles of stylization. Basically, he tries to say that it is barbaric to write a poem on Holocaust. If you go to the largest Holocaust museum, which is in Israel today, they do not charge you. They don't want to make money out of it, out of the suffering they underwent. Look at the ethical commitment here. In fact, I would say the Jewish nationalism can be seen here. If they do so, it becomes anti-art. It becomes contrary to the definition of art. And the easy example that I can give you is Mel Gibson, Passion of Christ. Passion of Christ had a better reach to the whole world. But what is the gain? The gain is millions of dollars. I'm not trying to discount on the artistic implications of that, but I'm just, there's no boundary. But all the civilizations in the world, including the last Western civilization, it collapsed not by an external influence, by an internal system that was corrupt. Too many countries got disappeared from the world map. The world map that you have in your hand is not a real one, it's a distorted one. At such a time, the resurrection of the state of Israel is a miracle. Judaism, the eternal civilization, exists in the world today. Hitler once said, I will wipe out Israel from the world map. It did not happen. Today, in Germany, people live quiet lives. Israel lives a thriving life. Germany is not how it used to be 50 years ago. Germany has a different picture now. If I were to paint Germany to you in the 1930s, I have to put some 4 or 5 terrible countries in the world today and call it Germany. I'm not trying to paint Germany black. Germany today is a very modest country. I only have to tell you that Israel survived in terrible hands. Today, the population of the Jews is just less than 1%. But you know the number of Nobel Prizes they have? More than 176. 80% of youngsters have college education. The European Jews have high intelligence in the whole world by clearing IQ exams with 97%. The average Jew is claimed to have intelligence of 15 times better than the others. In the US film industry, communication industry, financial industry, physicians, attorneys, newspapers, magazines, the Jews excel in everything. Most countries use technology. Israel makes technology. They can get to know if their plane is hijacked in less than a minute. In the year 1948, 20 million people came against Israel and fought against them. Israel only had 1 million people, just 10 lakhs. They still won. If you want to know more about these details, I would want you to read a writer by name Perry Stone, Perrystone, amazing writer and speaker on Jewish themes. In the United States alone, 100 years after immigration, the Jews are the richest religious group in America. 70% of wealth in the US, the NASA, the Wall Street, New York City belongs to them. What more do they need? Jerusalem has become the eternal capital of Israel. A tiny nation is able to influence a large country like the United States, by which it can move their capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They make up only 2% of US population, but 25% of wealthiest Americans. Friends, I'm happy the way US is handling the situation. I have to tell you that Germany did not know how to handle Jews. The world does not know how to handle Jews. The world, in fact, doesn't know how to handle intelligent people. I'm sure India cannot handle it. If your neighbor buys another car, you'll declare war on him. We are not global people, we are more local. The whole world owes to the Jewish people. India owes to Jews. We won the Kargil war with the help of Israel. And today, I'm speaking of today, this day, when I'm giving the lecture, that the Indian government is dependent on Israel for importing anti-missile technology. Imagine the fate of the millions of people who are diabetic in the world. If there is no insulin, which is given to us by a Jew, then what happens to them? From drip irrigation to penicillin to microchip to everything that man has today, we owe to the Jew world. But how did they survive? What gave them that resilience? You can't say since the Jewish people survived, we also will survive. For me to explain this point, it will take another lecture because there's a reason to it. It has to be explained to you. I also have to tell you that there are scores of things which I missed throughout my lecture. I have not told you about the establishment of the Jewish state, which I told it's a miracle. I didn't speak about the Six-Day War. I didn't entirely give you a report about Holocaust, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, post-war Israel and post-war Germany. I didn't speak about genocide studies or Holocaust studies. I didn't give you details about the places. It is left to you for finding. How many of you have seen the film Shawshank Redemption? You have the hero by name Andy, who escapes from the prison. And Andy Dufresne, who is none but Tim Robbins of the US. When Andy escaped from the prison, he wrote a letter to his friend. His friend is by name Red. He said, "Remember, Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. I will be hoping that this letter finds you and finds you well." Friends, the Jewish people enormously hoped. The world calls Zionism as radical nationalism, but they hoped and they seized the land. Viktor Frankl spoke about will to meaning, this Austrian Jew. Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the German-born philosopher, he spoke about will to power. Will to meaning not only won the Jewish people, will to meaning wins the whole world. I once asked one of my teachers in Jerusalem, "How do you forgive people who hurt you the most?" She responded, "Immanuel, don't you want meaning in life? When you forgive, you actually liberate yourself." Holocaust studies teach the world that there is grace in disgrace, hopes of spiritualized, transcendent prospects, and definite meaning that determine the intrinsic worth of an individual. I think the clock ticks 11 now. I'm so happy, and I thank the SRM University for this wonderful opportunity. We'll meet some other time, and you can write to me in case you have doubts. You can take down my number, 99658-79476. 99658-79476. Thank you for your patience hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Immanuel, for bringing
The organizers can take over.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Immanuel, for bringing the substantial bodies of Holocaust literature. Initially, the session, we thought it would be like a thriller, but now we realize it's tragic thriller with a happy ending. The session is like a diaries of communal memory, provincial memory, authorized memory in which we live. Thanks for your extraordinary presentation and wonderful narration of historical events. Participants, your questions are noted and you will be receiving your answers to your mail. And also, we are very happy to share Dr. Immanuel's email ID in the chat box for your verification. You can also personally send your questions to him. Regarding the feedback, the link is given in the chat box, both in Google Meet as well as in YouTube live streaming and in WhatsApp group too. You will receive your certificates within a week. You can also find a feedback link in the description box in the UTeam live stream. Thank you so much. Let us all join together to listen to the word of thanks by Mr. Anbumani, Assistant Professor, Easwari Engineering College, Department of English. Over to you, sir. Mr. Anbumani, sir, are you with us?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Jane, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir. You can go
Yes,
ahead.
yes, you are. You're audible.
Yeah, thank you, Jane ma'am. And the outset, I would like to thank respected chairman, co-chairman, director, principal sir, granting us permission to conduct the webinar. And I would like also thank deans, heads of the department, and our HOD sir supporting us and encouraging us for the endeavor. Next, I would like to thank Dr. Immanuel sir, Christian Memorial College, Oddanchatram. Sir, I really enjoyed the lecture, sir, and you enlightened us through your lecture, sir. On behalf of the English department, we would like to express our gratitude to the participants from various colleges. Once again,
Thank you, participants. You will be receiving your feedback and also your certificates. Feedback will be posted right now, and you will be receiving your certificates within a week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Meet you soon with another interesting speaker in another webinar. Yes.
you.